Can your screening process hurt your chances of keeping your rental property profitable? You may think that picking a good tenant is a crapshoot, so you might as well pick the first person and so that you can avoid having your property vacant. I will tell you that is not a good assumption. You could actually cost yourself more money on the back end with a skimpy screening process in terms of attorney fees, back rent not collected, or even damages. In today's video, I'm going to share with you some tips to keep a sound screening process. I sat down a little earlier with the leasing manager on my team and we came up with some tips for 2024. So before I get started, wanted to introduce you all to this channel. So I'm Veronica Woods, and welcome to the Real Estate Wisdom channel, where we share tips about how to keep a profitable rental property portfolio, as well as market updates about the real estate market in suburban Delaware County and Philadelphia. If you have comments for me or suggestions for new topics, feel free to drop a comment below. I also have some cool free downloads that you can take advantage of, and they're all in the description area below this video. So in our business, we sit down with our clients every week to review how the tenant screening process is going. And after screening nearly 1,000 applicants over the last few years, we have learned a lot. So I'm joined here with Samira, my leasing manager, and we're going to just share some of our top 5 lessons that we've learned.
Nice. So our first lesson that I definitely want to highlight for you guys, and to me it's very important, is really just listening to the market. So when we say listen to the market, we mean like think about the time of year that you're listing this property, think about the price that you want to list this property at, and also just really the demographics overall. However, my biggest highlight for this particular point is the time of year. For example, in real estate, traditionally from say about March to about give or take into September, the demand for rental properties are very high. Once we get into the October, those colder months, holidays to January, the market is typically slower. It's less demand on the in the market at that point. So just being able to take notice that if you list your property in May, you do have a higher chance of listing or renting your property out at $1,500 versus if you list it out back in October or wait till October to list your property. And we understand it could be delays with make readies, process, whatever the case may be. But you list that property in October, you have a lower chance of getting that high market value of $1,500 and possibly bringing it down to $1,400 or $1,300 a month. So this is something that we like to highlight because a lot of times we'll have, say yourself, talk to your friend Bob, who's also a property manager, listed his property in May, similar property, similar amenities, was able to get $1,500, got off the market in 25 days. Again, the demand is high in those warmer months. And then you go to list your property in October with those same expectations. You have to understand when it comes to those colder months, the closer it gets to the holidays, people are trying to conserve their money. And then really just the idea of it's less demand that time of year. So your prices will have to adjust according to then. The market is what runs or what drives rental rates for your home.
And summer is not just the weather, it's people like to move around, or especially families like to move around their children's school schedule. So that's one of the reasons. So the seasonality in real estate and somewhat similar to the sales market. So people just like to move. It's a lot easier to move during the warmer months, so to speak, and less so over the holidays. The other thing to keep in mind is the demographics of the ideal tenant or the tenants mostly attracted to the property. So a lot of that is going to be driven by the location. And so one thing that we coach our clients on is really just keeping track of who you're getting most of the hits or requests for viewings for. And you really have to have the price and as well as the amenities appeal to that demographic, because that's something we don't have any control over. And so depending on how competitive a neighborhood is, be it a college market or more of a commuter market into the city from the suburbs, that really does have a lot to do with how quickly the property will rent and the price that you're going to get. Both of those things. And did we miss anything else, Samira?
Um, no, I think those are definitely the top points of listening to the market and really just making sure that property adapts to that current market at the time. And really just kind of piggybacking off what you're saying really quickly, like here in Philadelphia, you want to keep in mind like University City. That's where like the millennials and Gen Zs are going. So they're looking for top-notch amenities compared to if you have a property, say in the West Philadelphia or Cobbs Creek area, their amenities they could skip a few because we're at this point looking at like families or as they call themselves baby boomers. So like you want to keep that in mind as well as you're getting your homes ready for the market in the area that you're looking to list it.
Yeah, and we will do another video just talking about how to match the amenities to the location and the price point. Maybe we should segue to our second lesson, which is sticking to your screening process.
Yeah, I mean, guys, from personal experience, if I can't say nothing else or stress nothing else on this video, please stick to your process. You've worked so hard to formalize your process in regards to, attracting tenants, screening them, finding the ones that fit for your home and bringing them in. So you just kind of want to you work so hard on formalizing that you want to keep it. You want to be consistent across the board, especially if you own multiple properties. I also find by just being consistent that you also have like a little bit of a checklist. And I don't know about you guys, but that keeps me organized to make sure I'm not missing anything. You have to keep in mind too, whenever we are doing rentals, it involves a lot of like legality in a sense. Like if you skip something, say for example, the tenant is like, oh, I need to move in because the property they're in now is being sold by the current landlord. They have 30 days to get into yours, and like their stress is now becoming your stress. You don't want to skip things on your checklist. For example, if you skip the rental suitability and you don't give it to them at the time of move-in, when it's time to move them out, it makes things that much difficult, especially in the Philadelphia market. It's best to kind of keep that process up front. And that way on the back end, God forbid anything happens or when it's time for them to do a turnkey, you won't run into any situations or problems.
Yeah, I wanted to just jump in about the legalities. You kind of touched on it, but there's really laws to protect tenants from being discriminated against. And one thing that really protects you as the landlord is if you do the same thing with everyone, whether they're getting a Section 8 voucher, whether they're renting or they have a high paying job. You want to be able to prove that you're doing the same thing with everyone. So that's why having those checklists are important. Again, you don't want to be accused of discriminating against one type of applicant. So that's very important. And then in terms of just expectations, you're going to get stories, hard luck stories from tenants all the time. I always have at least once a year somebody's like, you got to give a brother a chance. Like hear my story, but you don't want to listen to stories. You want to follow your checklist and be able to have that to fall back on. Because at the end of the day, you're not supposed to just get the first applicant. Your obligation to safeguard your asset is to get the best applicant. So that means really following a set process every time.
And even to when we say a set process, we're not just talking in regards to the screening, but from the time that they submit their application to the time they move in, just have a very consistent process or just even a checklist of things that needs to get done prior to you giving the key to that tenant. Because once that tenant is in that home, a lot of things that you may have discussed, a lot of things that you may have brought up in multiple conversations can be forgotten. And once they're in the home, it kind of becomes hard to follow up or backtrack or anything that you have missed on that checklist of yours.
Right. And I guess speaking of the process, The third lesson is about checking references. So a lot of times that's one of the things that people tend to try to skip through in the with the goal of just getting through faster and getting the tenant in faster. But we think it's the best practice to check their past rental reference. So that's a past landlord, past maybe one or two landlords, and then check more of a professional slash personal reference that could kind of speak to their character. And you're asking the same questions every time. You know, for the landlord, you're asking, did they pay rent on time? Were there any complaints? Would you even rent to them again? And then for a employer or some other personal reference, you may want to just kind of figure out what type of person they are, just to get a sense of their personality and get clues of whether they would take good care of your property. And the important thing is that um, even if someone's younger and they say they don't have as many references, still try to talk to someone because you just don't want to be able to get more information than you can get from blindly looking at an application. So I know I said a lot, Samira. I have my checklist of the things I talk about the references, but is there anything that I forgot that you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, see, in my opinion, it's almost like this is how I think of it as we go through our screening process, or how I see it. As we know, real estate is a business. You being a landlord over a property is a business, and the tenants you're bringing in, you almost want to think of them as almost like an employer or a partner, as I like to say. Which is why like checking your references lets you know who you're kind of who you're bringing into your home, who's gonna be your partner, like tell you when things are wrong, who's gonna communicate with you, whether it is something wrong in their property or they're behind on a rent or just being transparent up front. Like you kind of want to get an understanding of who you'll be technically working with to keep your home up and running. We rely on our tenants to give us feedback on the home on the day to day. Like we can't go to your house every day. We none of us ain't got time for that. So just like Veronica mentioned, even if they're young and they have limited references, I find a lot of good use out of just being able to talk to a friend they've had since they were 5 that's been there through the good, the bad, the ugly, and really just be able to speak to their character, because how they treat, how their bosses respond to them, how the previous landlord responds to them, how a personal tenant responds to them, and be able to convey that to you lets you know 9 times out of 10 how they're going to respond and treat you. So I know, again, it's not traditional to always call references. I know it's like, oh, this is more like for work. It's still a really good idea and a really good screening process. And just try your best to connect with at least 2 to 3 or even just one sometimes, just to kind of get an idea of who you're basically partner with in your home.
And I would say it's not that it's not traditional. I think people have gotten lazy because old school, and I think people definitely did that more often. Now, think about how many calls we get. So I guess we want to include this as a lesson that we don't get a lot of calls asking what we think of our former tenants. And if we got more of those calls, what we would say or not say would be telling to someone who was trying to keep up their screening process. So that's definitely a hot one for us. But segueing to our fourth lesson about being more open to pet owners. I know you got that one.
Yes, guys. As a fur mom myself, I will go above and beyond for my pet when it comes to if I had to look for a rental or whatnot. You want to keep in mind though, a pet owner has become very popular, especially since the pandemic. And here in Philadelphia, they make up a huge percentage of people looking for rental spaces. If you are dead set against having a pet in the home, you're not only missing an opportunity to find a qualified tenant, but then you also find this opportunity to make some extra income. People will pay top-notch dollar to have their pets in the home, whether it's a monthly fee, whether it's a deposit up front, whether it's writing out an addendum saying certain things have to get done upon them moving in and moving out. But again, you just being stuck on not having pets at all, you're losing a huge market, especially here in the Philadelphia market.
Yeah, I mean, people treat their pets like human children, and I think the point you mentioned about pet rent and sustaining the target rent that you want to collect is important. So big picture, by taking out or removing a potential part of the population who could be well qualified financially to rent in your home, you could be leaving money on the table. Now, I would say you may need to think about how many pets, and that's a different conversation based on the size of the property, the type of flooring. Sometimes I remember one time you were presented with an applicant with 3 cats in about 800 square foot apartment, and I know that was kind of a very tough decision on the part of the landlord. But it is okay to kind of have pet limits and saying those up front. But that is probably a better compromise, and we've seen better results than if you said 100% no pet.
Agreed. Keep in mind, as landlords, you do have that power to install those size restrictions, breed restrictions. Again, as Veronica mentioned, the amount of pets, say, hey, like we're only limited to 2, anything more than that, automatically, no, thank you. You have the right to do so. But again, just completely taken off the table circles back to that amenity and listening to the market. Again, in University City, there's a lot of pet owners as college kids. And if they can't bring their fur baby, whether it's a cat or a dog, into the unit based off of the restrictions, again, leaving a lot of money on the table.
Then, kind of segueing into the last lesson we'll share, which is to make sure you put all the rules in writing, including, will you allow pets? Will you allow one pet? Are you going to promise to do certain things in the course of the tenancy? And so you don't want to have things just kind of be in conversation through the screening process or when the showing, whatever those kind of things that you say, and everybody thinks it's a good idea. You want to make sure that they become part of the lease in writing. Either, have a separate rules section or an additional information section. You want to have everything reduced in writing by the time the tenant moves in, because you want to be able to, or you want to not have people say, oh, you didn't say that, or that's not what I understood. A lot of times there's a lot of things could be potentially up to interpretation. So you want to make the language clear and something that you can stick to. In the case of a pet, another a few times we said one pet, and then we go into the apartment, there's 2 pets. So if it was clear in writing that we're approving one pet and anything else requires further approval, then everybody's clear about the process if we do need to make amendments over time, which is natural. So it's not like it's set in stone, but you want to be able to say what I say, those magic words per your lease, and really be able to refer the tenant back to things in writing so that they'll know how to act.
Yeah, and then also think of it as a good source for you as well, as someone that oversees a lot of leases, get a lot of questions throughout the year from a tenant that I know I personally have countless conversations with based on our rules and regulations. It's always good for me to also, with the fact that we write it out, so that I can also refer back and be like, well, did I say that? I don't remember saying that. And because a lot of times too, if a tenant is in a pickle, they are very quick to twist a word or take one part of a sentence and run with it. And like Veronica said, it leaves it up for interpretation, assumption, and that's something that we want to kind of take off the table. So having as much in writing, whether it's on the lease or an addendum, like an additional form added, is very helpful for you to also refer back to when you're having these conversations, whether it's tough or easygoing conversation with the tenant.
So these are just our top 5 lessons. Again, if you put these things in place, either that you do yourself or ensure that your property manager does that on your behalf and understand kind of steps along the way, you will be assured to get the best qualified tenant every time and then do your due diligence on the front end, as opposed to give somebody the keys and then have the headache of getting them out on the back end Usually it's a result in some slip in the process to identify the best tenant. To wrap up, a good screening process increases your odds of maximizing the rent that you can collect every month, as well as minimizing the expenses that you have to pay out of your pocket. Now, if you want more insight about how to set the best rent with your rental property, you'll want to check out the video that's appearing on your screen now. As always, happy investing.